right. Some of you are probably wondering who's this guy with a suit. We have a guest speaker today. I had to wear a suit because I helped out on the main service for the first two services doing communion. And so this happens twice a year. So twice a year you see me in a suit. So don't get used to this. But before I get into the message today, a quick announcement. We are collecting a special offering for a sister that was part of this ministry that is doing a year abroad in Turkey, doing ministry out there. And she needs some help financially. And so we are collecting a special offering for her. It will be a second offering. So we'll take our normal offering, then during announcement we'll do another one, just so you're aware. But yes, do consider helping a sister in need. But regardless, welcome to News. And we are finishing up the book of Exodus today. We're not doing the entire book. We are going as far as we are going to go, and this is the last one. We are actually going to finish up the year. I'm actually going to go through selected passages in the book of Galatians. And I don't know why I didn't think about this before, because Galatians is kind of known as the Magna Carta of the Bible, meaning that it's like the main book about freedom. And we don't have enough time to go through the entire book before the end of the year, but we'll go through selected passages, and that will start next week. But today is the last that we'll be doing in the book of Exodus. So with that, let me pray first real quick, and then we'll get into the Word. Father, we thank you. We praise you. We just pray, Lord, that you would encourage us, that you would speak to us, and Lord, that we would be able to reflect on everything that you've been teaching us over these past few months. And we would see clearly, Lord, just how you are the one who moves in our lives, Lord, that you are the freedom giver, that you are the life giver. And we just pray, Lord, that we will be able to see more and more of that today as we reflect upon your word and your law. We thank you. We praise your name, Jesus. Amen. This is a Decalogue part 2. For those of you that weren't here last week, Decalogue basically means 10 words, namely meaning that we're going over the 10 commandments, and we're doing the last 6 today. And so before I get into this, the question I want you to ponder before we get into this is, often people complain about this, that people view Christians in a different lens. And so my question is when people put different standards on Christians, is that fair? Right? So I know some of you have probably experienced this, right? Where you're just living your life, being normal, whatever, and someone says, "Hey, aren't you Christian?" And you're like, "Oh." Normally it's because you're doing something that people don't think of as a Christian thing. Normally. And I see some faces of yeah, that's me. But regardless, the question is that fair? A lot of people say isn't this a double standard? Why are we judged more harshly? Aren't we human like everybody else? That's the question I'm raising to you today, and I want you to just have this in the back of your head as we get into this final part of where we are in Exodus. So we're going to go through what we didn't cover in chapter 20, and we're going to go over 2 verses in chapter 24. So Exodus 20, starting from verse 12, open up your Bible, smartphones, or look at the screen. Exodus 20 from verse 12, where the Lord says this: "Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God has given you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor." When the people saw the thunder and lightning, and heard the trumpet, and saw the mountain and smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us, or we will die." Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning." The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. Chapter 24, verses 7 to 8. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people. They responded, "We will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey." Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these works." I'll try to fill you in why I'm ending here and just kind of where we are. But just kind of remember, this is 2017, we're proclaiming it as the year of the gospel of freedom. So we went through the gospel of Mark, we saw the good news of Jesus Christ, we're going through the book of Exodus right now, and the hope that we all have is that we would all experience more freedom in our lives through the good news of Jesus Christ. Whether it is some type of oppression in our lives, whether it's spiritual, physical, whatever it might be. I hope nobody's enslaved here. But anyway, we hope to experience more freedom in this year. Now, we've been going through the book of Exodus. We saw, very quickly how God has kept his promise. He made a promise to these people 400 years ago, and he's making good on it, and he has raised up this very flawed man, Moses, and he still uses him, right? This man who is at this point 80 years old, who for 40 years thought he was going to be the savior of Israel. He completely failed, and for 40 years he lived as an outcast, as a shepherd, and God has restored this man and is using him to do mighty things and showing his mighty acts and ultimately bringing freedom for the Israelites. And now they've been wandering around in this desert. They've been complaining. God has still provided and has still been merciful to them, and now they have come to Mount Sinai. So basically, they are out Mount Sinai, and Mount Sinai is covered in fire and smoke. There's lightning. There's like this ominous trumpet sound. It's scary. And as we saw in last week, these 10 words, what we call the 10 Commandments, the Decalogue, this is actually God himself speaking, right? People forget this. People think of the 10 Commandments as just a list of rules that God gave Moses, and that's kind of true, but he did it in the presence of everybody. So all of Israel was assembled at the bottom of the mountain, and they are hearing the voice of God. And we saw in this passage how they're like, okay, can you tell God to stop talking because we're freaked out, we're going to die, right? Why don't you talk to Moses yourself? Or no, Moses, why don't you talk to God yourself and come back and give us a summary, okay? So he is literally speaking to the people. And this is why we call it the 10 words, because God himself is speaking and proclaiming these things to them. Now, what I want to remind you of is that God has already set them free, right? They're never going back to Egypt again. Egypt has been defeated once and for all. So this is not an issue of whether they will remain free or not. But God has said, you know what? I want more. I want you to be my prized possession. I want you to be a royal priesthood, a holy nation unto me. And the people responded by saying, we will do what God asks. We want this too. We want to be his people. And so basically, this is, when we look at the 10 Commandments, this is what I called last week. This is the people of God entering into a relationship with him. And so God is setting the terms of what does it mean to be in a relationship with me? What does it mean to be kind of like me? And so if you look at the first 4 commandments that we looked at last week, that's really about the vertical. That's the relationship between God and man. And these last 6 that we're going to go over, it's more about the horizontal, the relationship for each other, right? Now that we are the people of God, how do we relate with each other? So with that, I'm going to try to go through this quickly because I can get stuck on some of these, because some of these are pretty heavy. But I want you to just kind of keep the bigger picture involved of, first, your relationship of God dictates your relationship with everybody else, okay? Just keep that in the back of your mind. Number 5, honor your father and mother. My goodness, this is probably the most controversial commandment for Asians. Growing up in America, my Caucasian friends didn't really have this problem, right? Like, oh, my parents let me do whatever I want. As long as he's happy, right? He can do whatever he wants. That's not an Asian thing, right? No, it's not about you being happy, right? It's about you becoming a doctor or a lawyer, or it's about you making good with all these things that I've given unto you. So there's a different relationship that Asians and particularly Koreans have with their family. And so this is, honestly, when people, as a pastor, have come up to me for advice, number one, as I've always shared, is people are like, what is God's will for me? What should I do? That's the number one question, right? Number 2 question is, should I listen to my parents or not? And in that regards, it's usually specifically about a relationship with someone of the other gender. Almost always. There are a couple instances where it's career, like, going to like such and such school or whatever. But almost all the time it's like, my parents don't approve of my boyfriend or girlfriend. They want us to break up. What should I do? This is like the question I get asked the second most. And honestly, like, I don't even know how to answer it. Because, Scripture does tell us to honor your father and mother, but it doesn't necessarily say, do everything they say. Right? There's a difference. There's a difference between honoring and mindlessly obeying. Right? Because there are times, because our parents are also human, and they are also fallen sinners as well, that sometimes they're asking us to do things that aren't actually right. Right? So actually sometimes the way we honor them is to actually challenge them at times. So this is not a simple black and white answer. But for whatever reason, this is something that Asians and particularly Koreans struggle with often. Because especially with the generational differences and the cultural differences for Koreans that live abroad, this clashes often, where parents and children are in disagreement. But oddly enough, Paul writes in Ephesians 6 that this is the first commandment with a promise, right? That as the passage says, if you honor your father and mother, you will live long in the land, right? I don't know exactly what that means. If you obey your parents, you're gonna live forever. No, I don't know. Like basically, it's kind of one of those. We don't really know what that means, but at the same time, we are taught to honor our father and our mother. Now, some people look at this passage and they're like, this goes beyond just parents. This also includes like anyone in authority, whether it's someone who's a government or someone that you submit to. And generally speaking, I would say one of the things that the Bible does teach is submission is biblical. Right? It's in the Trinity itself, right? The Son submits to the Father and the Spirit submits to the Son. So you have within the triune God a line of submission. But the reason why it works is because they are all in unison. They are all of the same nature. They're all working hand in hand together. So when you can actually trust the person that has authority over you, submission is a beautiful thing. Unfortunately, that's not always true. But all I will say regarding this, I'm not going to give you like your default answer. I'm not going to give many of those today. It's like, yes, do exactly what your parents say. No, it's not always true. Right? Just to share a little bit personally, I'll try not to do this too much, but there's a good friend of mine, a guy I was really close with in high school. If anybody knows who Kim Go-mo is, the old Korean gasu singer, he looks just like him, except he's taller. He has the same like square jaw. Like we would actually play like Gayo Top 10 and Kim Go-mo singing, and then we like freeze it. We're like, hey Kwang, stand there. He's standing there. And we're like, oh, he looks just like he can't sing. But anyway, he was a very good friend of mine that I knew since 6th grade. And we grew up and we went to the same middle school. He started coming to my church around that same time. He actually became a Christian, like coming to our church from like 6th grade. Like his parents actually never became believers. So I basically knew him from the point of his faith. And he got really involved, especially in college, to the point where he was leading a campus ministry basically by himself. And I was really proud of him because I had known him since he first came to faith. And then he started dating a girl who was a PK, pastor's kid, right, a pastor's daughter. And things were getting serious. Her name was Christine. She was from New York. I actually never met this girl. But it was getting really serious. But then her parents were like, no. And I'm like, what? Like, he's great. Like, he's basically running this ministry by himself. Like, what else does he need to do? And the reason why they said no was because his parents weren't Christian. And I was like, what? And I felt it was a double standard because they were the first believers in their family, right? Their parents weren't Christian when they got there. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. And she obeyed and broke it off. And that ended up not happening. And he ended up moving on. He's married. He's got 2 kids now. So he's doing okay. But honestly, ever since that point, he actually hasn't been the same type of believer that I remember This was a guy that was doing things on his own and was like persevering, and then all of a sudden he became just kind of, it's not like he ever left the church, but he stopped being very involved. He was just attending. And to me, I don't know. Like it just really hurt to watch that change. And I don't know if what she did was necessarily right, and obviously God, did provide for him in other means, but it did make me think like, wow, like these decisions that we make really affect people, for better or worse. Regardless, I'm not going to give you an answer to this. Just know that God wants us to honor our parents. Moving on. All right, number 6. You shall not murder. I think this is the easy one. Anybody disagree with this? And this is like the simple, but one thing that we should know is that this does not say you shall not kill. Right? So Scripture does support, like, if you're warring with another nation, then yes, that you are allowed to use the sword for defense and to protect your nation, but that's different from murder, right? Murder is intentionally killing someone that isn't necessarily the right thing to do. So murder, killing, different. But I think everyone can agree in this room that you shouldn't murder. If you don't, maybe you should leave. Regardless, simple one. Okay, number 7. You shall not commit adultery. You would think this would be relatively straightforward, but unfortunately, this is in real modern days. This has become a big issue here in Korea. Now, interestingly, as of up until 2015, adultery was illegal in Korea. Like, that's crazy. Like up until very recently, it was illegal to be an adulterer. Even though I don't think it was it wasn't really enforced that often, and I think the few times it was enforced, it was always against like a cheating wife. I don't think I ever heard of a cheating husband that actually got in trouble for that old law. But regardless, up until 2015, Korea as a nation technically kept adultery illegal. It's very interesting, and it kind of shows the old history behind Korea of how elevated the family unit used to be. But unfortunately, the reality is Korea has not been a very good nation in terms of actually being a non-adulterous nation. And for those of you that know, like especially the business culture here in Korea, it's almost like adultery is part of work life. Like that's like the ugly truth that a lot of people don't like to talk about is that unfaithfulness is it's just how you get by. A lot of people think this actually starts in the military. I don't know. Some of our army guys can tell you yes or no. I don't know. But regardless, this is an issue. What is it? There's a statistic that this is a bit old. I think this is from like 2009, something like that, where they asked men in their 20s. And basically 20% of the men in their 20s admitted to paying for sex more than 4 times a month. So that's literally once a week, right? 20% of the male population in Korea in their 20s admitted that that's what they did. This was not by some weird organization. This had to do with the Department of Crime or something like that in Korea. So this was actually a legitimate study. And it's if you that's 20% once a week. If you expanded it to once a month, it's probably 40%, something ridiculous like that. Infidelity and those type of things has become a common part of Korean culture for whatever reason. And it saddens me, and this is why we're also seeing the trend that the Korean divorce rate is now one of the highest in the world. Some people say as high as number 1. I've seen specifically for sure it's gotten as high as number 3 in the world. And the current trend, my understanding, is late divorce. So basically they wait until the kids are out of the house, and then the wife finally pulls the trigger. And so people are getting divorced later in life. That's a very common trend here in Korea right now. This is the reality of where we live. Now, one of the things that I want to touch upon this is, why is adultery such a big deal to God? Genesis 2, the institution of marriage itself. People like to think of marriage as a human-made thing. It's not. The Bible teaches us, Genesis 2, God makes Adam, he's like, oh, this is no good, this guy's lonely. He makes a woman, he's like, bam, you guys get married. And so that's Genesis 2, right? Where two become one. That was a divine institution. That is marriage. And so adultery is strictly attacking that institution. Of course, God does not want that. Malachi says in the book of Malachi, God hates divorce. God also hates adultery. And so again, this is something that, just like in the previous where I said you shall not murder, most of us should be like, oh yeah, of course you shouldn't commit adultery. But realistically speaking, if the statistics are true, then this is a rampant issue within the church as well. That's just reality. So brothers and sisters, what I want to say is, this is something that God does not approve of. Keep that in mind. Keep it going. Okay. You shall not steal. Again, this is something that most of us say, oh yeah, you shouldn't steal. And actually, Korea is an interesting nation because physical theft is generally not a big deal, right? Like in America, if you like put your wallet down and you literally turn in one direction and you look back, it's gone. Right? That's like America, right? And so like that's why like my friends from America, they're like, hey, I'm gonna go to the bathroom here, can you wash my stuff? Like that's a normal American response because it's literally you go to the bathroom and you leave your bag, you come back, it's gone, right? That's normal. In Korea, that's not true, right? People will actually use their wallet to leave if they want to like save a seat, they'll literally put their wallet on the table, walk away, go go to the bathroom, go buy something. They can be gone for like an hour, and that wallet will stay there, right? That it will protect their spot. Now there are occasions where some people do steal, but generally speaking, Koreans are generally pretty good about not like stealing physical property. That's why you go to like a market, everything's out. Right? In America, you leave that much stuff out, like it's gone. There'll be kids running around with like oranges like in their hands. That's the reality. So like Korea's different about that. And like it's to the point where like literally you could drop money and someone will chase you down to give it back to you. Like it happens. But now this is the area where I might get a little controversial. When it comes to things that are not physical, like let's say namely digital, Korea is not so good about, right? Now, I'm a video game dork, and so I grew up as a big Nintendo fan, right? And I know we have at least one other Nintendo fan. Anybody else into Nintendo? Right, guys, Nintendo. Okay, so I grew up on Nintendo. Nintendo hates Korea. First off, Japanese and Korea, I know it's not a good relationship, that's one issue. But the other issue is, Korea is so bad about piracy that Nintendo hates selling products here because they know that they are going to get stolen from. Back when the Nintendo DS was the most popular handheld device, Korea bought more units of the actual handheld than games, right? So literally that means Koreans were not buying games. They were just buying the unit and they were downloading all the games. Like back then, you could go to like Yongsan or whatever, get a Nintendo DS with like 100 games preloaded onto it. You still can. And the thing is, the way the video game industry works, they make their money off of the games, not the actual devices. So of course, they don't like that. But I remember when I first came to Korea, this is back when they had the fake DVD, sellers at every corner selling you these fake DVDs for like 5,000원 or something like that. This is a country that doesn't care about digital property at all. But this is also a generation that doesn't understand what digital property is. Right? I'm from the generation, I'm a bloody pirate. Okay? I started pirating in middle school. My first thing I downloaded illegally was a 400K game called The Incredible Machine. It took 40 minutes on a 2400 baud modem. But anyway, I did this knowingly. And it was exciting, downloading something illegally for 40 minutes. But, and I was a good pirate. But then when I went into ministry, and it never bothered me even when I was doing like lay leader ministry. Like I was doing a lot of campus ministry with students, so I would take them to my place, and back then I had like an Xbox, and I had a whole bunch of movies loaded onto it. It was like my media center. And so we would watch movies on my Xbox, and occasionally I would get a college student be like, hey, isn't this not right? I'm like, shut up, don't worry about it. But once I got into full-time ministry, one of my colleagues knew that this was something that I kind of struggled with or didn't see as an issue. And so he wanted to hire me to become his associate pastor, but he's like, this is my stipulation. If you come on board, you have to give up piracy. I had to think about that. I was like, but I did. I completely gave it up. And the thing is, I could give it up because I knew what it was. Right? I knew what I was doing, which was illegal. I knew exactly those things. And so I stopped doing it. And honestly, for me, it was like, it was a level of freedom I never experienced before. It's like, I felt like a burden was lifted up, like, oh yes, I'm buying music, hooray! Like, for whatever reason, I felt so much more refreshed. But the issue that I see today is most people in this generation actually don't realize what's legal and what's not, right? And some things make it unclear. Like something like YouTube. YouTube is very gray because it's very difficult to police. There's a lot of illegal stuff on there, but it's difficult for them to get it down. So it makes it very gray. But generally speaking, if you don't own the digital rights to something that you've downloaded or streamed or whatever it is, it's illegal. Simple as that. Even before Netflix came to Korea, even using a VPN to access things that were that locked in Korea, that's actually technically illegal as well. Whether you pay for it or not. The license for Netflix and Hulu back then was only viewable within North America. Netflix changed. Hulu hasn't. So using VPNs to unlock something that isn't allowed in this nation is technically illegal. Simple as that. To me, it's very black and white because I did this knowingly. I knew what was legal and what isn't. But I realized that this generation, there's a lot of confusion. Anyway, all that said, I was trying to warn you guys I could get stuck on some of these. Personally, I learned to give this up. And so personally, it has been an actual great burden that has been taken off my shoulders. And so I encourage you guys that if you make that same choice, I think you'll experience the same type of freedom. Continuing on. You shall not give false testimony. So this is different than just lying, okay? Because back then, they didn't have like DNA evidence and stuff like that. Basically, the only thing that determined whether somebody was guilty or innocent was on personal testimonies. So like Deuteronomy will say you need a testimony of like 2 or 3 people, but regardless, what you said dictated with whether someone was guilty or innocent of some type of action. So what this is saying is, don't lie for the sake of actually condemning someone for something they didn't do. Okay? That's what false testimony is. So in that same way, it's not simply being truthful, but in the sense that you are actually either you're hindering justice, essentially, is the issue with Commandment 9. I'm going to keep going, because I'm slowing down. So, Commandment 10 is you shall not covet. Now the thing with you shall not covet is wanting something else, like, wanting someone else's car, someone's stuff, someone's family, someone's house, all these different things. Basically, this is the root of all of the previous commandments. When you think about you shall not murder, you shall not steal, these are all rooted in the heart of coveting. So Commandment 10 is the only one that actually deals with the heart issue itself. Is that when you covet other things, that makes you do things that break the other commandments. Okay? So all I can say from this, brothers and sisters, is it's very easy for us to look around and see things that we're lacking in. Right? Whether it's material things, or you could even covet someone's abilities. Like, man, I wish I was smart. I wish I could I could like speak languages like that person. Like, you know, it's very easy for us to compare, right? And myself as like this old dude, like, I wish I was married to that person. Like, you know, there's so many things we can compare to other people. But brothers and sisters, what I think God is really trying to get us to understand is be thankful for what He has given and blessed you. When we are coveting other people, we are forgetting what God has freely and graciously given unto us. So be content with what you have. Don't waste your time looking at other people's stuff or who they are. So, continuing in the passage, like I said before, basically the Israelites, after hearing God speak for so long, they're like, okay, Moses, we can't handle this anymore. Why don't you go up there and talk to him by yourself and come down later, which is what he does. So as I said before, he talks about the book of the covenant, which is from the end of chapter 20 up until the end of chapter 23. That is basically Moses going and talking directly to God and bringing that information down. That's the next 3 chapters, right? But for the 10 Commandments, the Decalogue, that's God speaking directly to His people. So they heard every single thing that God said here. Continuing on. But Moses says the reason why God has spoken is so the fear of God will keep you from sinning. You have seen the awe, the power, the mightiness of God, and this is for the sake that this will keep you from sinning. This reminds me of Proverbs 9:10, where it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And so, brothers and sisters, I think one of the things that we're reminded of is that reverent fear is actually a good thing. When you look at God with reverent fear and with respect, that keeps you focused on the right things, right? If we are looking at God, like I've said before, as like God is our homie, right? God's our boy, right? Like those shirts, like, Jesus is my friend, like this buddy Jesus and stuff like that. When we look at God as just one of our peers, that completely changes our perspective on things. But when we look at Him as the holy, the awesome, the amazing God that He is, that gives us a very different perspective. And here it says the beginning of wisdom. We tend to make better choices when we look at God with reverent fear. And to me, this is something that I think our generation struggles with. I think like when I look at my parents, they get fearing God. Especially my grandparents, they get fearing God. Maybe too much. But for us, it's like we look at God a bit too casually at times. And so I think that image of Mount Sinai, covered in fire and all these things, it was necessary for them to remember who God is, what holiness really means. Just keep that in the back of your heads. So going to chapter 24, Moses comes back down, he reads the whole book of the covenant, and the Israelites are like, yes, we will follow this. This is chapter 24. And so they say, we will do everything the Lord has said, we will obey. Right? This was verse 7 on Clash of Clans, or Clash Royale. Anyway, we will do everything the Lord has said, we will obey. They have heard the book of the covenant. And they're like, you know what? We want to be in this relationship with God, so we understand what He wants us to do. And so Moses then, they had sacrificed some animals. Moses takes this blood and he sprinkles it on them. And he says, this is the blood of the covenant. You are now the people of God, essentially. There's actually baptism today going on in our main church. And for those of you that know our church, we're a Presbyterian church, we sprinkle. This passage is where sprinkling comes from. Okay? It's from the sprinkling of blood at Mount Sinai, where the people of God, Israel, were entering into a covenantal relationship with God. This is where sprinkling comes from. So when people ask you, how come your church doesn't do full immersion, like that? It's because they're getting this from Exodus 24. It's the people of God entering into a relationship. So this is what happens. Moses tells them, God has freed you, but He desires you to be His people. This is what it means to be His people. And they say, we will do it. And so they enter into a relationship. So let's kind of wrap this up. So coming back, 40 years passes, and unfortunately that generation is a sinful generation. They keep complaining against God, and so He says, you know what? You're going to wander for 40 years. You're not going to get to enter the promised land. And that includes Moses. And so you go to the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy literally means second law. Basically, Moses is saying the law a second time. So basically, Moses brings up all these young people. Everyone else has started to pass away. Moses is one of the last people from his generation. So he brings up these young people that were not adults back when they were at Mount Sinai. They might have been babies, they might not have been born. Moses gathers them and he tells them the Ten Commandments again. This is what we witness. This is what God said at Mount Sinai. And so everything that I just said, starting from last week, those 10 Commandments are retold in Deuteronomy 5. Why? The reason why is because this is a generation that needed to hear it for itself. Because the reason why God did this in Exodus 20 was for that generation to not look at him as, you're my father's God, but to say, you are my God. This is about entering into a personal relationship with God. So Moses had to do it again 40 years later. Because that generation needed to make that same proclamation, you are my God. And I touched upon this last week. Brothers and sisters, my hope for each and every one of you is that in a similar way, that when you come with God and that you can actually enter into a personal relationship, that he's not just the God that your parents worship or your grandparents worship, but that you can proclaim, he is my God. I am in relationship with him personally. My hope is that every one of you can have that experience and understanding God intimately yourself. And so basically you look at this law and it's explaining what this relationship means. And as I said before, this is kind of like the DTR between Israel and God. And so what the law does is essentially there's hundreds of laws and it gives us all this detail about different things, but what the law essentially does is it shows who God is. In this situation, this is what honors God. So in this you can see, oh, this honors God, this glorifies God. So this tells me a little bit about who God is. As I've said before, holiness is such a very generic term. It basically means set apart. But how are you set apart? What does holiness really mean? I think it's something like 600 laws. They show you in greater detail what the holiness of God really entails. But one of the things in the law is, you look at the holiness, and one of the things it does is you realize how unholy you are. You're like, oh my goodness, I can't do this. But within the law, there's sacrifice. In the law, it says, okay, when you commit a sin, you do this, and this is how you cleanse yourself. So even within the law, there was provision to bring yourself back into reconciliation, to bring yourself back into relationship. And ultimately, we know, brothers and sisters, that there was one great sacrifice once and for all that brought us into continuous relationship with God, and we know that it's Jesus Christ. So God, even in giving his law, was also giving us a way to not be condemned by the law. God had everything figured out from the very beginning. So unfortunately, when you look, especially in the time of Jesus with the Pharisees, they looked at the law as something you could accomplish. Right? If you do this, you do this, you do this, you're okay. But that's not really what the law is meant to be. God was not giving us a bunch of rules and regulations so we could follow it and become exactly to say we did it, we solved it, we are now in relationship with God. No, it's not something that can be accomplished. And Jesus shows us when he goes to the Sermon on the Mount in the book of Matthew, and he actually starts talking about the law and the Ten Commandments, and he reveals it's even more difficult than we thought. He's like, yeah, you agree that murder is wrong, you agree that adultery is wrong, but you know what? If you think evil thoughts, if you have murder in your heart, in your mind, then you've already committed murder. If you commit adultery in your mind, in your heart, you've already committed adultery. It's like, oh my goodness, like who can do this? Who can live a sinless life without breaking that law? Jesus completely transformed every understanding of the law, blew everybody's mind. But what the law does is, as I said before, it shows us who God is. In many ways, it does condemn us because it shows us how much we fall short of God. But the main point of the law is to show us this is who God is. And at the same time, it says, you know what? You need help. If you really want to be in a relationship with God, then you need someone to make things right. And that plan was there from the very beginning. But the law shows us that we need a Savior. So, just like the people of Israel, in that same way where blood has been sprinkled on them, brothers and sisters, we have the blood of Christ, as the book of Hebrews talks about. That this once perfect sacrifice, this is the sacrifice that has brought us in relationship with God. We, in that same way, are people of the covenant. We are part of that promise that God has made. And so, to wrap it all up, as I said before, the law first shows us our relationship with God. And then it shows us how we're meant to relate with others in regards to that. And as I ask that question is it fair for us to be held to a higher standard? And I say yes. But the reason why I say yes is because we believe in a holy God who can empower us to become more like Him. Right? So, people look at you like, man, aren't you Christian? Shouldn't you do better? You're right. I should. And I can. Because God can change me. The Holy Spirit can root out these issues. So brothers and sisters, let's cling to God. Let's focus on our relationship with Him. But have that goal of really being a people set apart. Making wise decisions. Choosing to do what is good and is a blessing to all rather than to do the bare minimum. Right? Now I'm speaking to the choir because for those of you that really know me, I am the master of minimal effort, maximum reward. Right? Like, I will get just enough done, and I will often excel. So people are like, oh, like, you must have prepared a lot. Whoa. That's how I've always functioned. And so a lot of times people will come up to me asking these questions about gray areas, right? And when they do that, they're basically asking the question, how close to sin can I get without sinning? Right? And so the analogy I give them is, there was this family, for whatever reason, they were moving, and they needed to go up this windy mountain to the top, because their house was up there. I have no idea why. But it was a very dangerous, treacherous path. And so the husband was trying to hire a driver for his family. I guess it was a horse buggy or something like that. And so he was interviewing every driver, and the first driver said, you know what, I can get 1 meter to the edge, and I will not fall off. Next driver's like, I can get half a meter to the edge. Next driver's like, I can get 1 centimeter to the edge. I'm that good of a driver. Of course, he would not hire any of these men. Instead, he chose a man that would stay as far away from the edge as possible. Brothers and sisters, that's the heart that we should have. We shouldn't be asking, how close can I get to sin without sinning? The question should be, how far can I get away? That is what it means to seek to be a people set apart. That we are making choices and that we are choosing to live above reproach. And essentially, then we can actually meet that double standard or higher standard that people give. And the reason why isn't so we can be like, oh, look at us, we're so great. No, it's because God can do this. It's because by living like this, we are honoring Him. And it's only by seeking to honor Him and to allow Him to transform us that this can happen. So let's focus on our relationship with God and ask Him to transform us so that we can truly love those that are around us, just as He loved us. Let's take some time to pray and close for today. I want you to take a moment to just ask God, are there things in my heart, are there things that I'm doing, things that I'm dealing with that maybe aren't right in your eyes? Are there areas of compromise, or are there Are there things that I really should be more diligent about? Just ask Him to reveal at least one of those things. And as He reveals it, I want you to just pray, God, help me to overcome this issue. Help me to become more like You in this circumstance. So let's take a moment to ask God to reveal the struggles of our heart, and then to ask Him for the power and the strength, and even the accountability to overcome it. Let's pray. Really focus on the love that God has for us, that we're not looking at Him as a vengeful or angry or judgmental God, but that He